I think it's okay to forget all the trauma that has happened growing up from the day you were born till your 21st birthday, and to leave it behind you as if it was a distant dream that you keep coming back to. I am a big firm believer of living now or in the present and love finding new ways to put my past aside. But dropping off my girlfriend at work today had me thinking, what makes me me? So I wanted to tell you about a story of my near death experience, one that had made me close a chapter of my life and flip my personality into the one you know of now. I also don't encourage the use of drugs or alcohol at all. I'm just telling you my experiences. When in my teens, I was never one to go out of my way to make new friends and always stumbled across really amazing people that just let me into their lives or their friend groups without much hassle. A pair of these friends gave me the opportunity to move in with them, all coming from different backgrounds. I was fresh out of high school and experimenting with different substances and adventuring as much as I could with my newfound freedom. That thing that your parents used to tell you, if someone told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? Looking back, I thought if it was with my friends, it would be okay. And now I have this glooming trauma that will just live with me forever. One of my closest friends at the time was always good at telling stories about the time they had dropped LSD and how much of a good time it was going to parties and hanging out with girls, getting shit faced, and waking up in the next morning in bed with a different girl every time. I thought, hey, how fun could it be? What started off with a fun time or experiment slowly escalated into me with a concussion, totaled car, and being put on probation. I'm not going to tell you about the first time I dropped LSD, but this accident. We could go ahead and save that for another video. My roommate and I were bored out of our minds on a summer day, coming back from our retail jobs and learning what it meant to be adults on our own. We decided to dedicate some time to drop some acid and hang out in our apartment, watch movies, and play games. If you don't know, acid could last upwards from 6 to 10 hours depending on your body type and the dose. Just like any other drug, I tried it right out of the gate of high school. I said, fuck it. How bad could it be? Knowing damn well my first time was not exactly a joyride. My roommate heads out while I'm in the middle of playing League of Legends on my shitty Dell computer I found on Craigslist at the time. He comes back 45 minutes later with a strip of tabs. Being the ignorant shit I was, giving the impression he was always partying and going to social events, he always knew a dude that knew another dude that would supply him with whatever he needed. He comes back around mid afternoon, and we take our first hit, which actually should have been our only hit that night. We decided to hang out in our living room. He jumps on his laptop to play some League of Legends, and since my computer was in my room and required a monitor, I decided to just jump on Xbox and play some Mortal Kombat. What felt like 30 or 40 minutes, I'm starting to realize the sounds and colors of the room start to change in correspondence to the colors on the TV, sitting on the floor since we were too poor to buy furniture or a wall mount. We decided to giggle off into space. Everything around you seems to melt and fuse together, and focusing on a TV became too hard of a task to perform, given the fact that the screen is no longer a TV. It's but a picture in a frame and sat on the floor that occasionally changes colors. Midway through a fight, I paused the game and walked up to my roommate, which felt like teleporting from one part of the room to the other. I asked him, "How's your game?" And which he replied that he had no idea he was actually playing a game. From what I remember on the screen, he was actually in the middle of a match and was sitting in his spawn staring at the screen for the entirety of the game. Convincing ourselves that we'd be no good at playing any games, we decided to pull out Monopoly and set up the game for three, even though there was only two of us. The game felt excruciating to actually set up due to having to count the money, sort out all the chance and treasure cards, and while starting up the game, I decided to play some music. We unconsciously just stopped playing Monopoly to hear all the pretty sounds coming out of my phone. I don't remember what we were listening to, but what I do remember was comparing what was playing from my phone to another song and just how fucked up we were. We just could not tell the difference in between the two different songs because we got caught up pausing and playing two different songs at once, trying to hear similarities. After a while, we convinced ourselves to watch a movie. We decided with The Conjuring, and the only memorable parts of the movie were about how handsome Patrick Wilson was when he was exorcising a demon. During this point in time, I had started to notice tracers in my vision, and I was eating some cheesecake, twirling around a fork, laughing my ass off on how hard I was peeking. Keep in mind, the walls are melting and all the furniture looked like it was breathing. Eventually, we had started the subject of dropping another dose, and both fell into the peer pressure of each other, talking about how fucked up we were. I don't know why we needed to go outside of our apartment for this, but we took another tab outside beside his car in the middle of the night. The details in between that second tab and my accident were but a very faint blur. And after we took the second tab, another cycle of 10 hours added onto my trip. I remember my roommate telling a friend of his from his college that he would be able to go and crash at our place for a while. His friend was about 2 hours away and actually packed all of his things to stay over. But apparently, he had forgotten to give him the apartment number and only gave him the address. So his friend had slept in his car outside of our apartment until he remembered about him. I decided to go ahead and invite two girls from where I worked over to hang out, and they pulled through when I told them that I was tripping balls and really needed company. I wanted to talk to someone other than my roommate that I've been tripping out with for the last 8 hours. Our conversation would just consist of us looping back to how high we were and how crazy we have been tripping and what we were seeing. I'm pretty sure we talked about our lives from what we remembered is our beginning and to the present time and moment we were living over and over and over again. I know we cried multiple times during those conversations, and once the two girls I invited came over, we had discussed about how I was tripping out for so long and how they just came also back from drinking and clubbing with some other friends. They decided as they were recovering from their hangovers to start watching the Netflix series Black Mirror. If you thought the second half of my trip was going to be smooth sailing and don't know what Black Mirror is, go ahead and watch a few episodes and come back to this video. I was going to be fucked up, and my mental was spiraling out of control. Every episode we watched was overanalyzed, and I was starting to lose my mind. My roommate actually had a girl pick him up to go hiking for his second half of his trip and left me alone with my two coworkers. As each episode passed, I slowly started to lose myself, thinking I was part of this bigger narrative, that someone was watching me and my every move. As if I was a rat actually stuck in a cage in a 3-bedroom apartment with other rats in their own cages and apartments. I have been tripping for too long. My perception of time was innate, and I was stuck on this idea that I would keep re-upping until I ran out of acid, and that I would just keep tripping for the rest of my life, or until we ran out of acid. I wanted it to stop. I wanted the effects of this drug to be no longer in my body, but there was nothing I could actually do. I was stuck in my home that I perceived as a cage in the middle of the second day of my trip. That's when I had the bright idea of just going to sleep, sleeping off the drug, hoping that I would just wake up and it would wear off. My roommate had came back with his girlfriend from his hiking trip and fell right asleep. I told the two girls to leave, and so I could be alone to actually just fall asleep. I didn't really care about how confused they were when I suddenly started telling them to leave as they were really close to me. And from their point of view, I was probably just really angry that they were there, and I eventually left. I was alone. My roommates were both asleep, and I forced myself into my room just to lay in bed. I was still hallucinating, and it was a lot more noticeable now that I wasn't focused on a TV and my two coworkers. I turned my lights off and sat in complete darkness. It was nighttime again, and I was still high. It's been what felt like days since I took my first dose. I haven't left my apartment, and I began to start hallucinating voices talking to me, different from my inner monologue. I'm now engulfed in fear. Fear that I would not just stop feeling the effects of the LSD, fear of the drug not wearing off before I have to actually go to work, fear of my parents finding out that I've been experimenting with drugs, and fear of never leaving my apartment. This new fear of also dying alone without providing any significance to anyone. It felt like I was peaking again. The sounds in my room were so loud. All of my senses were dialed to 11. I couldn't take it. I jumped out of bed and I just grabbed my car keys. My heart's pounding. I needed to be somewhere else. I could not be in that apartment anymore. It took a while for me to go ahead and encourage myself to leave. I took off while my roommates were sleeping and just got in my car, started driving. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew I didn't want to go back to the apartment for any reason. And the idea of just showing up to my parents' house in the middle of the night was out of the picture, since I would be too paranoid that I would find out that I was on something. I played blaring music and just kept driving. It didn't last too long, though. 30 minutes into driving, I started to hear messages in the music I was listening to. Just stop driving, crash. It would be over if you just died. Now, I was skeptic at first, but I slowly convinced myself into swerving into a side rail, going 60 miles per hour, crashing, causing my car to roll and stop at a tree. I closed my eyes and hoped that my suffering was going to end. Part of me now believes I died in that car crash, but writing this out, I'm glad I didn't. I got lucky. I woke up to several people surrounding my car, which had flipped upside down, shining their phones, flashlights into my eyes. Everyone's just frantically trying to make sure I was okay. I haven't felt like anyone has asked me that for months. Firemen and ambulances arrived to pry my car door open, pull me out of the wreckage. At this point, I slowly come to realization that I was alive. I'm still high. And not only did I survive my suicide attempt, I'm being taken away in an ambulance, zooted out of my mind. Finally coming in contact with now strangers who know I'm under the influence of something. I remember the two EMTs talking about what I could be on and saying that I had a bad trip. A bad trip was an understatement. I'm having the worst time of my life right now. I was still having a bad trip. It wasn't over. We arrived at the hospital's emergency care facility. The nurses had stripped me of all my clothes down to my underwear, put me onto a dolly, and throw me into a CAT scan. I didn't know who I was, where I was, and you bet your ass I don't remember any of my family or friends' numbers off the top of my head. I was strapped to a hospital bed, and a police officer began to interrogate me. It was generally about the prior accident, trying to find out what I was doing and how he could actually charge me for my recklessness. Me, practically scared out of my mind, told him bits and pieces of what I could remember. I'm still tripping out. My pupils look like a cat's eyes. I gave names of everyone I talked to in the last 2 to 3 days and fabricated small memories into sentences, praying that I would not be sent to jail. After evaluating that I was too fucked up to be taken to a jailhouse, I was just hospitalized. I stayed up another night, still tripping balls, thinking about how I could have now be strapped down to a bed, forced to be alone. I thought about my new future and how I was going to be able to change as a person if this LSD wore off. It was midday before I was sober enough to remember my Facebook login so I could message out to my family and friends about what had actually happened. I was visited by my mom and sister. I cried so much. All I could remember is saying sorry. Sorry for leaving them and not listening to them about drugs or hanging around bad influencers. To wrap it up, I had a couple of checkups from a psychologist and was discharged from the hospital. I moved all my things back from my apartment to my parents' house, and that was it for me and my life of experimenting with substances. If you have any stories like mine, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you enjoyed my story and want to hear more like it, let me know. And don't forget to follow or subscribe. I stream on Twitch Monday through Friday, around 5 p.m. PST. Link is going to be in the bio. I love you guys. Thank you so much.
残り1名。これがお前たちの望んだ悪党よ。